The following morning, we left Rainbow Lodge at 11 a.m. and found the trail up Fitzsimmons Creek was excellent to travel on. But for some exciting moments with wasp nests, we had an enjoyable day's journey to the cabin on the meadows below Avalanche Pass. The two miners we found to be not at home, so we made ourselves comfortable in their absence. The next day we spent in climbing Mount Overlord, which had been climbed for the first time by Mr. and Mrs. Monday a few months earlier. They had much more snow for their climb, and were able to go up the Fitzsimmons Glacier from the base of the mountain. Owing to the opened-up condition of the ice, however, we thought it better to keep to the rocks as much as possible. To avoid the glacier, we climbed the east peak of Red Mountain, which we descriptively named Black Mountain. Once again, we were blessed with a very clear day, and we secured an excellent panorama of the Garibaldi district and the Pitt River Mountains. The large Cheakamus Glacier, with its huge icefall, showed up particularly well, and in the distance we could see Mount Cathedral of the local Vancouver Mountains and Mount Baker in the far distance. This peak connects with Mount Overlord by a narrow ridge, composed of a series of sharp pinnacles. The rocks were so rotten on this ridge that we called the largest pinnacle Refuse Pinnacle, on account of the trouble it gave us in circumnavigating it. Once round this, we got onto the neve of a small glacier, and a short walk took us up to the summit of Mount Overlord. Some of the peaks to the east of Mount Overlord looked as though they might give us some good climbs. We had no more time that day, though, so we went back to the cabin. On our way back, we found it easier to go over the top of Refuse Pinnacle and to drop down to the glacier at the foot of it. We had crossed the neve of this to Red Mountain, where we picked up our tracks of the morning. Our sleep that night was seriously disturbed by a couple of large pack rats and a number of mice, and the pack rats carried a large portion of our firewood from behind the stove to the floor under our bunk, where they were evidently trying to make a nest. On Monday, September 17th, we made a half-day trip to Mount Whistler. The top is a series of mounds, and it takes some time to find out which is the highest. From the highest point, we had a fine view of Rainbow Valley, and the Garibaldi district tempted us to photograph it again. Mount Whistler is said to be 17,200 feet in height, but it not seem to us much higher than the Helmet Peak of 6,800 feet in the Garibaldi district. The next day, we set out to climb the peak we had seen from the top of Mount Overlord. We followed our old tracks over Fitzsimmons Glacier and Refuse Pinnacle until we came to the glacier just below the peak of Mount Overlord. We crossed this in an easterly direction until we came to some pinnacles on a ridge, running east from the peak we had just left. We followed the rocks downwards towards our objective, and we soon discovered that the only way we could climb it was to cross a knife-edge ridge of ice, about 150 feet long, and then find a way up the rocks. Crossing the ice took us some time, as we had to cut steps, Neal breaking his ice axe in the process. The rocks were loose, as usual, and we had an exciting climb to what we thought was the top. We were mistaken, however, for the top was about 50 feet away and about 10 feet higher. The only way to it was a long, very sharp knife edge, which we had some trouble in negotiating. Once on top, we hurriedly built a cairn and retraced our steps as soon as possible, for it was bitterly cold. The peak we named Mount Diavolo, owing to its character and the weather conditions under which we climbed it. Its height we estimated to be about 7,700 feet. The weather up to now had been growing more and more threatening and cold, and at this point the clouds descended on us like a thick fog, accompanied by a high cold wind which, however, did not disperse them. The next day it began to snow, keeping up until we left the day after, by which time there was about 2 inches of snow on the ground. Thus terminated the summer climbing season, and our 2 wonderful weeks of tramping and climbing around the virtually unexplored peaks of the Alta Lake District.